This is our fifth and final video comparing Peterson and Harris in the debates that they've just been having in Vancouver, in Dublin, and in London. In this video, I just want to compare them on the question of religion. I think Peterson values religion too highly, and Harris values religion too little. Peterson values religion too highly, and really he has to. As an evolutionary psychologist, he sees religion as an emergent part of our history. It is the storytelling that has been reflecting on 3.5 billion years of evolution and codifying truths of our existence that transcend our tiny time frame. Therefore, religion has been an essential part of our evolution, and therefore it must be adaptive to our survival. Since that's the case, Peterson has to own the religious impulse across all cultures, no matter how repugnant some of those religious expressions have been. So his attempt to redeem child sacrifice, a universal across human cultures, is tortuous and kind of disturbing.
I'm not trying to argue against the horror of child sacrifice.
No, I would never imagine you would.
I know. But I'm also trying to.
But my work would be much easier if you did that.
Yes, and the work of journalists as well. Although they've tried that pretty much anyways.
That's right.
So. Right, that would even be worse than enforced monogamy, hypothetically.
No doubt.
Yes. So see, let's say that I'm trying to give the devil his due, and I'm trying to understand from an evolutionary perspective, like a cognitive, behavioral evolutionary perspective, let's say, why that particular set of ideas would emerge, and in many places, perhaps autonomously, or once having emerged, would spread like wildfire. It's like, because I'm not willing to only attribute it to ignorance. Now, we could attribute it to ignorance, no problem, man. But there's more going on there because it is a human universal.
As a Christian, I don't affirm the religious impulse as such. I'm not particularly attached to religion or even the concept of God. I'm like a woman who's like dead against marriage, but I've met a guy, and so I've kind of gotten married. Why? Because I now believe in the institution of marriage? No, it's just he's converted me. It's the same with institutional religion. I'm not favorably disposed towards human religion, but I've met a guy and he's kind of converted me. But that means that I don't have to own every universal practice of human religion. I don't think human beings are the measure of all things. And therefore I can point to things, even things that are human universals, and I can say that's wrong. Because my adjudicator of good and evil is above our universal human experience. Peterson's adjudicator is not. Peterson's adjudicator emerges from the ground up. And if it truly is a human universal, then it has proved its utility in the struggle for survival, and it can't easily be jettisoned. Peterson does not do a good enough job of distancing himself from the evils of religion. And in fact, methodologically, he can't. Peterson values religion too highly. Therefore, he just ends up endorsing a whole bunch of religious-sounding terminology that he just doesn't have to. When Harris asks him to define God, Peterson defines every mystery in the history of mystery. The results were not just a word salad, but a whole word grocery store.
So, God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology. God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience. God is the source of judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices and something akin to the transcendental repository of reputation.
God is lobster of lobsters, the tidier of rooms, and he will have his vengeance in this life or the next. Right? You know, I share Harris's frustration with this kind of wordplay.
I'm not hearing a God, a personal God who can possibly hear anyone's prayers, much less answer them, right? And so I'm wondering what percentage of religious people who would say, oh yeah, I believe in God and it's the most important thing in my life, what percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described?
But if Peterson values religion too much, Harris values religion too little. In the 4 debates, his main references to the impact of religion were ISIS fighters, Aztec priests, tarot cards, and astrology, right? That's what Sam Harris thinks of when he thinks of religion. It's so ridiculous that in Dublin, one of Europe's great cities, Harris relates how he was walking through the city and he came across an example of religion that he thought would be germane to the debate that night. And you think, oh yes, what did you see, Sam? Did you see churches, cathedrals, universities, schools, hospitals, charities, all founded by Christians? I mean, even the Guinness Brewery has a fascinating Christian origin. Look it up. But no, none of that struck Harris as a good example of religion. You know what he picked on? Harris noticed a woman on the street sitting at a trestle table doing tarot cards readings, right? And that was his example of religion. Only Sam Harris can walk through Dublin and think that religion's influence is best expressed by a street hustler. And it makes me doubt that Harris is investigating these issues in good faith. He seems to be falling majorly for confirmation bias as he addresses the evidence on religion. While he champions rationality, his own prejudices are so influential he fails to be rational. It's ironic, isn't it? He wants to build a world where everyone simply rationally assesses the evidence and makes good moral choices, and yet he is exhibit A for why that cannot work. We're just not neutral observers in the world, and Sam Harris, ironically, is one of the most biased observers going. And he's the most biased observer going of the very thing that he wants to teach us about. Rationalists, it turns out, aren't that rational. I mean, take this example of how he approaches another human universal, sport.
The World Cup is on right now, and we literally billions of people care down to their toes what happens to this little ball as it traverses a lawn, right? And if it goes into the net, it really matters. And if it fails to, it really matters. And
it always matters if we hit the target, Sam.
But this is something we have manufactured to care about, right?
No, it's something that speaks to us unbelievably.
It's quite literally a game. This is a game that people are playing, but some people take it taking it further than seems truly rational is part of the fun. But the people who can't turn that off.
It's a metaphor. Soccer's a metaphor.
Yeah, but there are people who the fullback who kicks an own goal and then goes back to his South American village and gets murdered, right? He's surrounded by people who are taking the game too seriously.
Yeah,
right?
okay, I agree.
Yeah, and so my problem with religion is that so much of the time we're meeting those people, and we're not criticizing those people. We have no place to stand to criticize those people because we're so attached to the game.
Billions of people enjoy the beautiful game, and Harris can only think of football hooligans. And he can only think of that one time when disgruntled fans shot a Colombian footballer, right? See, Harris's rationalism says everything must be assessed by brute facts. But that commitment to brute facts is a universal acid. It won't just burn through religion. It'll burn through sport, art, the humanities, and actually, as we pointed out in our first video, it burns through morality and even science too, because facts are not everything. You actually need values. You actually need a priori commitments, faith positions, to even begin rationally assessing the world. To insist that all things must be rationally justified is to burn away at the foundation of all inquiries, even rational inquiries. This comes across in his analogy with the bookshop.
And what I'm perpetually in contest with, even in conversations like this, is the sense that the rules need to change just a little bit for this class of books. I mean, literally, this side of the bookstore, right? There's like any other part of the bookstore, well then, there's no barrier to honest conversation. But you move over here, you've got this shelf of books, there you have to hold your tongue. Right there, we can't pick and choose. We can't say that, while we can say that Shakespeare wrote some fantastic plays, the best plays ever written, and some are actually not that good, right? We can't say that about God, right? We have to find some tortured way to make the most of his diabolical utterances.
I've got 3 problems with this bookshop analogy. I mean, first, where does Sam Harris live where religious books are given more credence than all the others? Like, is he living in Tehran? Like, really? I have to say, in my local bookshop, the religion and spirituality section is the same section as the food and well-being section. which says something about where we place diet and exercise in our modern world, but that's another video. But nobody in my world takes that section more seriously than, for instance, the science section, right? I just don't recognize the world that Sam Harris is so afraid of, where religious people and views are treated as sacrosanct. In my corner of the world, if a view is even suspected of being religiously motivated or derived, it is not protected, it is derided, it is demonized, right? That's the first thing. Secondly, Sam Harris should know that it's the science section that is actually sacrosanct today. He should know that because he wrote a book on moral philosophy called The Moral Landscape, and he wrote it as a neuroscientist, never once engaging with philosophers, be they religious or secular, but swanning in as a scientist into the field of moral philosophy, which is at least 2.5 millennia old. And Harris espoused in that book a theory that has been put forward before. I don't know if he knows this, but 200 years ago, Jeremy Bentham had a kind of a scientific consequentialism, but Harris doesn't even seem to know who's on his side, and he certainly doesn't seem to know that the fundamental tenets of his argument have been devastatingly critiqued for thousands of years. But he swans in as a neuroscientist and says science can deliver to us moral objectivity, and suddenly he's a New York Times bestseller. It doesn't matter that no other moral philosophers of note think Harris has done anything to progress the study of moral philosophy, and plenty have slammed its arguments. Nevertheless, The Moral Landscape earns him millions because it is presented as scientific, right? You tell me which section of the bookshop is privileged over all the others. You know, and Harris should know, it's not philosophy, it's not theology, it's science, right? But finally, as Sam Harris imagines his rationally ordered bookstore, he tells us that we can study Shakespeare, but we know how to sift good plays from bad plays, and he wants that same standard to be applied to every section of the bookstore. Fine, I agree, 100%. Every section of the bookstore should be like that. The religion section should be especially like that. There are plenty of religious books I would like turfed out of the religious section of my bookshop. There are good books and there are bad books, but Sam, we need to interrogate that little word good and that little word bad. By what standard are we making these judgments? It is not self-evident. We need value structures that cannot be built up merely from the facts. We need a priori commitments. We need faith positions. We need a standard to apply to the books that renders them good and bad. And your standard, Sam Harris, is blatantly biased, non-obvious to the vast majority of human civilization, and it is, in principle, impossible to be derived from brute facts. The trouble is, Sam Harris, you don't want an end to the priesthood. You just want you and your friends to wear the robes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the comments below.